The figures confirm the unemployment rate in the Hunter is much higher than state and national levels. However, they also show there's been a slight drop in the number of people out of work. In the Hunter, the unemployment rate for November 1983 was 11.9%. In November 1984, this was down to 11.4%. In Newcastle, figures were slightly higher. In November 1983, the rate was 12.7%. In November last year, although the rate had dropped 1% to 12.6%, it was still the highest unemployment rate for the state. Although the figures are consistently higher than state and national levels, fears that unemployment was running at twice the national rate have now been quashed. There were mixed reactions to the unemployment figures today. Federal member for Newcastle, Alan Morris, is cautiously optimistic.
They indicate that we are worse off than the national average, and we've long known that, but they also indicate the economy in Newcastle has bottomed in its recession and is now starting to recover. I think that's a very good sign.
President of Newcastle Chamber of Commerce, Peter Evans, agrees the figures show there's been an improvement.
Well, it's good to see an improvement. Obviously they present a challenge because we should be a lot better than we are, but they're coming down, and I think they'll continue to come down.
How do you think our unemployment problem could be improved?
It's very obvious to us in the Chamber that there is an imbalance in terms of employment in this region, and the imbalance is that the tertiary sector is about 4% below the national average. And what we've been putting to the New South Wales government for quite some years is the proper decentralisation of government departments from the Sydney CBD to this region.
However, the Secretary of Newcastle Trades Hall, Peter Barrack, disagrees.
It doesn't surprise us, it certainly disappoints us, and because the figures are so bad that obviously we're going to have to sit down and have a look at it and determine what our response to it is going to be.
Shadow Minister for Housing and Construction, Michael Hodgman, while in Newcastle today, went even further.
I believe you have a government which frankly is taking you for granted. I think you've got to stand up and fight, and I think I don't need to refer to any other statistics except the continuing high unemployment rate in this area, the lack of government activity, the lack of effective action.
Was led by the official party, followed by the 2nd Battalion of the Royal New South Wales Regimental Band. Marches in the parade included First World War veterans from the Light Horse Brigade, the Royal Navy and surviving diggers. 2nd World War veterans from the Polish contingent and the French Foreign Legion joined the marches from the Royal Australian Air Force. Soldiers from the Vietnam War took their part in the parade that marched to Civic Park for the official Anzac ceremony. Reverend Angus R. Ewan opened the service, followed by a song from the NBN Children's Choir. The commemoration address was given by David Hughes from Waratah High School.
Men who fought at Gallipoli were a mixture of men from many and varied backgrounds. There were labourers' sons and doctors' sons fighting side by side. There was not the factionalism or differences in opinion we find coming into conflict today in everyday life. It is a shame that it takes a war to bring out these qualities in men.
The traditional minute of silence was followed by the last post. One of the youngest surviving diggers is 84-year-old Don Douglas of the 48th Battalion, 4th Division. He joined to serve his nation at the age of 16 and was wounded in battle on the Somme. He says the memories of the Anzacs will never be forgotten.
Do you think the Anzac ceremony is losing its meaning?
No, definitely not. Never will.
Why do you think that?
Well, the average digger's got that sentiment. And we'll die with that sentiment.
At Singleton, almost 100 ex-servicemen and members of the RSL set off in a procession led by their president, Mr. Les Griffin, who served with the 2nd 17th Battalion. Singleton Town Band's 20 members provided music for the marchers, whose flag bearer was Lieutenant David Phillis of Singleton Army Base. As the veterans marched past the library, they were joined by young people from Singleton schools, such organisations. At Burdekin Park, the townspeople met for a united Anzac service.
To discuss ideas for future studies. There are 500 students enrolled in the 5 Christian schools in the Hunter region, which are supported by donations from parents as well as funding by the state and federal governments. Their aim is to provide an alternative to Catholic and public education by encouraging Christian values in both school and family life. Organiser of today's seminar and principal of Medford Christian Community School, Ross Collier, says that Christian schools fulfil a specific need in the education system.
They offer an alternative to both the Catholic and the public schools, in that at our schools, the 5 Christian schools in the Hunter, Christ is emphasised in all areas. We are basically there to support those families that are teaching Christian values in their home. Christian schools allow both the home, the church and the school to be brought into harmony.
Enrolments for the Christian schools in the Hunter have risen. What do you think are the reasons behind that increase?
Those families that love the Lord see Christian schools as a method to have Christ reinforced. In the state system at the moment, Scripture and Christian ideals are being phased out.
The fair has attracted doll enthusiasts from as far afield as Canberra and Melbourne. It's the 3rd year it's been held, and proceeds from the weekend are donated to charity. Dolls on display range from new versions of antiques to reproduction celluloids and wax dolls valued around $550 each. There are also dolls of different nationalities, including the French, which are considered among the finest in the world. The most expensive is a Jumeau doll, valued around $5,500. Closer to home, there's a series of historic Australian dolls, including Captain Cook. But for those who regard dolls simply as toys, there is also a charming series of Beatrix Potter characters. The 70 stalls include an impressive collection of doll accessories, which are distinctive for their careful attention to detail. The fair continues tomorrow at the Police Boys Club, Broadmeadow. International leader of the Salvation Army from 1977 to 1981. At a meeting held in the Newcastle Salvation Army Citadel, he met with Salvation Army officers from the Hunter region to discuss current issues facing the movement. He said one of the worst problems that needs to be addressed is the increasing number of homeless people.
The greatest challenge facing the Army at the moment is the care of displaced people. I don't think the Army has ever been faced with so great a challenge.
Even though you're retired, you're still actively involved in the Salvation Army. How would you describe your role now?
I suppose I could do it in one phrase. Actually, now I'm an inspirer of the inspirers. I suppose it's my responsibility now to move around the world and to motivate people to do things faster and to do them better and to do them more intelligently and to do them more compassionately.
A festival of music will be held at the Newcastle College of Advanced Education at 7:30 this evening in honour of Mr Brown's visit.
The match was in complete contrast to last week's loss for the Falcons, as they started well with all players in fine touch, and the teamwork was smooth and effective against a solid but not as brilliant a defence as Brisbane's was last week. They led well for the first half of the match, by 20 at one stage, but the Wildcats, with Big Dan Clausen leading the charge, showed why they were previously undefeated as they came back to be almost on level terms with just a few minutes to play. And the stadium erupted over the closing stages, with the Falcons showing great character to stave off the charge and win well in the end. The Wildcats' Dan Coulson was top scorer, and local import Scott Horrell, Newcastle's man of the match.
Almost 2,000 runners swarmed up the esplanade at Terrigal, the starting point for this year's Surf to City fun run. The race was run in cool and mostly dry conditions, suitable for setting a record pace. The hilly 11-kilometre course into Gosford spread equal the pack, and a small group of runners made a break up front. Soon it was a race for two between Peter Hayes, just ahead of last year's winner Andrew Lloyd. With half a kilometre to go, Lloyd made his move and was cheered home well in front of Hayes. Lloyd's time of 31 minutes 42 seconds was just 1 second under the old record. The first woman home was 26-year-old Jenny Walker. At Singleton, a fun run was also held. The Anzac Day 10K at the Singleton Army Base covered a testing cross-country course. 500 competitors powered their way through the event, organised by the Army and the Singleton Bicentennial Committee to raise money for Lions clubs. The battle for first place was between David Lightfoot of Merriweather Heights and Matthew Todd of Sydney. Around the halfway mark, Lightfoot pulled away to a convincing lead. He crossed the line in 32 minutes and 7 seconds, breaking the old course record by 3 seconds. The first woman home was Margaret Mercado of Sydney with a time of 40 minutes and 36 seconds.
The HMAS Brisbane slid from its berth in Newcastle Harbour at 8 this morning and began a trip that would take it more than 30 nautical miles out to sea. On board were the usual complement of 350 crew and 40 Royal Australian Air Force officers from the Williamtown base. The aim of today's exercise was quite simply to teach the Navy and the Air Force to work together. Since the loss of the carrier Melbourne and its aircraft, the Navy is working more than ever with the RAAF. Operation Shop Window gave the RAAF a demonstration of the need for air support during naval operations and an appreciation of the difficulties involved. During the day, the Brisbane faced repeated mock attacks by Mackie and Mirage jets from Williamtown. In the operations room, radar operators identified and tracked enemy or friendly fighters. The computer-controlled Tatar missile system then swung into action with only moments before attack. If a fighter snuck through, the destroyer's two 5-inch guns were brought to bear. Although not a single shot or missile was fired, and the drama was played out mostly on the radar screens, Operation Shop Window was important training for both the Navy and the Air Force. Is that kind of cooperation something that has become more necessary since the exit of Melbourne from the scene?
I think it was always important, and I think all members of the Defence Force increasingly realise that they need to operate together far more closely. And let's face it, I think those conflicts that have occurred around the world show that it is absolutely essential that the three arms of the services do learn and understand closely one another's method of operation, the good things about it, the difficulties with it, so that they operate together efficiently and effectively, and therefore, of course, they make the best benefit of the tax dollar. The air conditioning in this ship, in fact,
Tomorrow night we'll report on the technology which makes the Brisbane one of the most powerful destroyers of its kind in the world.
The police report on the accident says the driver of a four-wheel drive lost control of his vehicle on a wet and greasy section of road near the Lakes Surf Club. The Jeep Cherokee smashed into the front of a southbound Falcon sedan carrying the family. The driver of a following vehicle, a Datsun, was unable to prevent his car crashing into the rear of the Falcon. 3 of the 5 people in the concertina sedan died instantly. They were 55-year-old James Borg and his wife Lily and Mr. Borg's sister Margaret. A 16-year-old girl was severely injured and is being treated at the Royal Newcastle Hospital, while a 14-year-old boy was taken to Wyong Hospital with only slight injuries. Neither the lone driver of the Cherokee nor that of the Datsun was injured, apart from cuts and abrasions. But both will be reported by police to the Commissioner for Motor Transport, alleging negligent driving.
Mr Wan says the legislation removes support for export trade products over a period of time and also removes the government's support for preventing interstate trade. He says the effect of a free market on the present crisis in Victoria would be to aggravate the problem of low-income farms while plunging the industry throughout the rest of Australia into a similar crisis.
I believe it will aggravate the position of dairy farmers in Victoria because up till now they've had some insulation from open price competition in the marketplace. That will be removed by the federal legislation and aggravate the crisis.
What are the implications of this to New South Wales?
Well, not only for New South Wales, the entire industry in Australia will be subject to very, very fierce price competition. The effect of this will be to send those groups within the industry with high overdrafts bankrupt, dairy farmers, processors, distributors and so on. And the result, of course, would be at the end of the day that the industry would be dominated by very few large concerns.
The Queen Street depot in inner city Newcastle has been an important part of the council's operations for many years, but now the County Council has decided to move the centre of its service operations further west. SCC Chairman Councillor John Jobling.
Because the Wallsend depot, whilst it's the major depot, has been somewhat restricted on ground. As you're aware, we've been able to purchase a very large adjoining block of land which gives us access to the Newcastle Road, will ease the residents' problems of entrance out there, and it now means that we can set out and master plan that depot, which means we can implement the requirements to leave Queen Street entirely. In other words, we'll get rid of the trucks and the poles and the transformers and the banging and clanging and oil that goes on there. And what we're looking for in the master plan is to determine how we may best use that piece of ground. And the thinking at this stage is that it's perfect for residential development, and we're thinking at this stage that it may be low-density residential development.
It's expected to take some 3 years to transfer to Wallsend, but the planned residential estate will provide a much-needed injection of population into Newcastle. In another move, the County Council adopted its 5-year capital works plan, with its growth forecasts, review systems and major works programs. Councillor Jobling says it will act as a blueprint.
It's necessary for proper planning, it's necessary to know what we're going to do, to set out all the expensive capital works in a priority, and then to put the individual works into the ranking order so that the engineers will know what we're doing, and when we come to budget time, so that we can allocate the monies correctly.
The industrial and commercial electricity consumption figures were also released today. The figures are seen as a barometer of the economic growth in the Shortland County Council's feeder area, and it seems this region is growing steadily. Coal mining had the largest increase of 9.7%, but government instrumentalities in the fertiliser industries followed closely behind.
The wedding reception was staged by the Newcastle Toastmasters Club so that its members and interested guests could gain first-hand experience of how a wedding reception should be run. The Master of Ceremonies was Joan McCarthy, who kept the proceedings running smoothly. 14 people made up the wedding party, including Faye Brown, the bride, and Scott Seddon, the groom. About 20 guests also attended. The objective of the Toastmasters Club is to give its members experience in public speaking, and the number of toasts required during the reception did just that. There were also some nice touches to add to its authenticity.
Congratulations, Faye and Scott, for just today the marriage was begot. What a fine pair they make!
Although the reception went off without a hitch, the Toastmasters say at this stage they won't be following it up with the wedding.
The love and warmth that Jan had.
The latest death occurred at Fresnay jail near Paris, where prisoners took to the roof to protest overcrowding and long trial waiting periods. There was panic when tear gas was fired among the demonstrators, causing one man to fall to his death. A battle between inmates and police followed, but eventually the disturbance was controlled and the inmates returned to their cells.
During the Newcastle Regional Maritime Museum Regatta, which was held last November. The event, which was the first of its kind for many years, was considered a resounding success, not only because of the support of the residents and sailors of Newcastle, but also because it was able to raise $1,250 for the Westpac Rescue Helicopter appeal. In markedly colder conditions, the cheque was handed over to the Director of the Rescue Service, Terry Mulville, today. Mr Mulville says the appeal has reached around $225,000, but he says there's still a long way to go before it reaches its target of $500,000 in October.